it's like a waste of these resources. We have every library on the planet and every expert on the planet. We can do more critical thinking now than ever. And it seems like we're more blinded and closed minded than ever. And it's such a shame.
It's a shame. Yes, I agree.
Hello and welcome to the next episode of Cylinder Radio. I'm your host, Will Roosh, educator in Los Angeles, talking a lot about critical thinking, viewpoint diversity, and all of that stuff. And my guest today is someone who's very aligned. It's Kathy Gibbens. She's a homeschool mom who, during the pandemic, jumped into the world of logical fallacies and critical thinking. And now, going all in on that and doing some really awesome stuff. And because we are so aligned, both of us were kind of like, oh, like, I see you. Let's go. Let's talk about this. And let's try and get more of what we promote out into the world, because I think both of us see it as the solution to a lot of the problems going on in society. So Kathy, I'm excited to talk to you and dive into all this stuff. Thank you for coming on and let's go. So tell us like a little bit about your background, how you kind of fell into this, and then we can dive into more specifically some of the practical applications that parents have when it comes to different things. We're also going to talk about cognitive biases a lot, and all of the holdups that people have in being a logical thinker and a critical thinker because of these different biases that we all walk around the world with. So if you're aware of things, then they're going to be on your radar. But if you're not aware of it, it's almost like you don't know what you don't know. So yes. Let's get right into it, Kathy. It's great to see you. Just give us a little bit of your background, and then we'll start talking about all of the things that we're seeing in society and how critical thinking will get us out of it.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thanks for having me on. Thanks for being on. And this is great. It was so fun when I first heard you. It was on Dr. Tina's podcast. I've been a listener to her for a very long time. And I was like, oh my gosh, I got to find this guy, because we're definitely thinking along the same lines. And I love that you're reaching out to teens, to kids, because man, that's where my heart is. So I had a good education. I went to a private Christian school, never learned about critical thinking, never learned about logical fallacies or anything. And it was I'm a homeschool mom. We've been homeschooling our daughter since the beginning. She's a senior this year. So it's crazy. Like, we've gone all the way through. And the year that she was in the 7th grade was 2019, 2020, which of course, as we know, that's the year that the pandemic happened. And then we started getting all the fact checkers coming online. And then we rolled right into the election, which, the 2020 election, which was crazy. And the thing that was so cool is that year, part of her curriculum, she had to read, and she had this little group, the homeschool program that we're with, they meet in class once a week. And I was leading her little class, right? And one of the books that they had to read was called The Fallacy Detective. You might be familiar with this. And it's this fun book. It's perfect for middle schoolers. And it just introduced them to logical fallacies. And they had so much fun with it. Like, they got it, right? Middle schoolers, all they want to do is argue. And so if you teach them how to do it well, they get it, And what was crazy is I watched these kids go through that time period compared to their peers who weren't necessarily getting, taught critical thinking. And they went through it so differently. And watching a presidential debate or any kind of political debate with kids that have been trained to think critically, it's a totally different ballgame. Like, they're like, well, that's a red herring and that's an ad hominem. And I thought, oh my goodness, if you teach people, kids especially, because they just get it so much faster than I think even adults do. If you teach them these simple skills, they become almost impossible to fool. And I thought our country would be in such a different place right now if everybody had these skills, right? We would be able to see things from both perspectives without breaking our brain, right? Because a good mind should be able to see both sides of a topic or of an issue and think about it well. But I just realized, oh my goodness, we've got to get this out there, right? So I started a podcast. It's called Filter It Through a Brain Cell. Season 1 was all about logical fallacies. Season 2 is cognitive biases, short, fun episodes, because I thought this does not need to be difficult. Like, let's make this easy. Let's make this very accessible. And so that's how I got here.
I love it. Isn't that crazy that how long ago the pandemic was now? It freaks me out a little bit.
Like how like it.
My concept of time has changed so much since the pandemic. Like,
it's like two different worlds. Yeah,
it really is. Yeah. So like getting into this, like, what do you think? Why do you think that this stuff, like we've learned so many things in like traditional school. I went to a traditional school. I've taught in more traditional schools my entire career, but these things aren't covered. We cover what is a covalent bond and what is magma, all this stuff, they get into like very advanced mathematics and things, but not really like how to think. I mean, it's like that cliche, right? Of teaching kids how to think, not what to think. And it's not really covered in schools so much. Why do you think? I don't know. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, well, it depends on how far back you want to go. There's two main reasons. The reason why our education system is the way that it is, it has to do with all the Prussians. You probably know this whole story, right? Mm-hmm. The Prussians, they used their whole system was built on their military, and then they had this terrible loss to Napoleon, and they said, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? And the reason they discovered that they lost is because the soldiers were thinking for themselves. They were picking and choosing which orders and which generals they were going to listen to. And so the king of Prussia was like, well, we can't have this. We need to create something so that when the men get of fighting age, they will do what's called salute and execute. My husband used to be in the army, and they had this saying: if you're given an order, you salute, you say yes, sir, and you go do it. You don't question. You don't think for yourself whether this is a good idea or something else would be better. You don't get to do that in the military. And so they're the ones that created the educational system that we have now, where you come in at, a young age and you're with your peer group and you've got bells and teachers and everything is very siloed. And the whole purpose was to create somebody who would salute and execute, who was trained to listen and not think for themselves. Well, they make great soldiers. They make great factory workers. They make really great employees. And so from around the world, countries sent people. We sent Horace Mann. That's who went and learned and brought it back to our countries. Now, even still in the United States, they valued logic. It wasn't until, from what I can find, and you maybe have seen more of this, Will, but is up till the 1950s, they still taught logic in most schools in the public school system until it was deemed not necessary anymore, because social sciences and social things were considered to be more important. And then they started teaching to the test, right? And the testing got to be really big, and it just kind of became not required. And as soon as it became not required, we started to see it drop off. And there's still some schools that they'll teach debate, and sometimes they'll get some logic in with debate, but that's kind of it. And it's kind of crazy because it's like, wow, we claim that we're teaching kids one thing in our school system, but we're not actually giving them the actual skills to be able to do that. And I know that's what you have seen too, just listening to your story. I know you've seen that as well. And that's why you are doing what you're doing.
Yeah. I mean, I'll put on my tinfoil hat. Yuri Bezmenov, are you familiar with him and the stuff that he was pretty clear. He's like, the education system, teach them things that aren't going to be useful. Teach them things that are just going to, Yuri Bezmenov was like a propaganda minister for the Soviet Union. And he said that, there was this long plan. It's like many decades long of how they're going to infiltrate different areas of American society to try and bring about more Marxism. And whether or not that's actually happened, it's almost like what you explained about the Prussian model and the Rockefellers and Horace Mann, saying like, let's make good factory workers. Like, even if that, even if that isn't what happened, it looks like what happened. I mean, we know that that's the way it's established. And then we look at the results, and there is a very direct correlation there. Now, again, we know correlation does not equal causation. That's like the number one rule of social science. I get it. But at some point, you're just willfully ignorant not to say that this doesn't have any impact whatsoever.
Yeah.
No, like, that's another thing that I was thinking about, Kathy, is the robber barons of the Gilded Age said we need really good compliant factory workers who are just going to do what they're told. And that's what you want from your employees, I suppose. But if you look at what's going on now, it doesn't even do that, because look at the literacy rates. Look, my wife, used to have a salon, and she would hire people to come in for like front desk work, and they would all have at least a high school degree. Many of them would be a college degree. And she would be like, all right, now formulate an email to like a hypothetical upset client. And they couldn't even do that. So, people don't show up on time. The requirements when it comes to in schools when it comes to things like showing up on time, behavior, all of that kind of stuff isn't even being enforced. So
No.
we're not even making great factory workers. I mean, you have to show up to a job at McDonald's, nothing against working at McDonald's, it's props, but like you have to show up on time. So it's not even doing the thing it was designed for, which is just like an extra. I mean, if this was like making kids at least able to come out of high school and be able to get a job and they were equipped to just sit on that assembly line, great. But they're not even able to do that because of the more like soft skills of, you know, how to like hold a schedule and how to, you know, do basic literacy. I mean, that stuff's not even being promoted now. So I think it's just very interesting to me how as it was designed, it's not even doing that. And I'm not sure exactly why, but yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy because one of the things that I believe is that we as human beings cannot be free. And I'm not just talking political freedom. That's what everybody thinks. I'm talking free in every way that a human being is supposed to be free, as we were designed and created to be free, if we aren't able to critically think. And so when you remove that aspect and when people don't have that skill, we are not able to operate properly. And you know, and it's kind of crazy because you're right. Not everything, most of the things that the educational system is supposed to be doing, they're not doing, and they're not doing well. And it's not to say that there's not kids out there who are getting into colleges and things like that. But like you said, let's look at the whole person. Let's look at the entire person of what it should be. And then the question comes up, well, whose responsibility is that? Is it always the school's responsibility? Is it the home? Is it right? There's a lot that goes into this. But yes, as a whole, we are not even spitting out the basics of what the education system alone is supposed to be doing. I don't know if you've ever seen that. Sometimes you'll see these posts of here was the average, you know, graduation test from an 8th grader 100 years ago. And 90% of adults couldn't even pass it these days, right? So just the level has been brought down. Everything has been brought down. And it is creating something that I don't think any of us hopefully feel like, wow, this is really beneficial for the person. This is really beneficial for society. You're right. It's kind of crazy. And I feel like, wow, we are at a point where if we don't do something about this, we're in trouble.
For sure. You know, getting into cognitive biases and things along those lines, like I think if you go to just about any classroom teacher around the country, you say, do you promote critical thinking? They would say, yeah, of course. Critical thinking, of course. But as soon as it's one of those third rail topics, and we know which ones those are, you know, anything that has to do with race or gender or any kind of political issue, really, then it goes out the window. So it's easy to be a critical thinker when it comes to something that you're not emotionally attached to. But the things that seem to matter, the things that are really like in the public discourse that there's so much contention over, and there's so many like blind spots of people on both sides, if there's two sides to this, those are the issues that we really need to be critical thinkers on. But we get cloudy. We get cloudy because things take over our rational brain. I would define critical thinking as being able to see things from an objective standpoint, being able to use logical reasoning to arrive at your stances and your beliefs. And when it comes to certain issues, that's the ones, and those are the ones that are most important. Those are the ones where critical thinking is most needed, and those are the places where it's most lacking.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with you. And this is one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, because I'll give you my reasons for why I think this is happening and for why I think critical thinking is so lacking in society today, and why we're seeing the stuff that we're seeing and the reason that people aren't. So I want to ask you this question, but let me give you my 2 reasons. And I'm curious if ours are anywhere close or what you think. So I think there's 2 things that are really, not that there's not more, but these are 2 of the big things that I think are really affecting people's ability to think critically. One is emotionalism. And people are so led by their emotions that that's the highest priority, is how I feel. How I think and how I feel has been elevated in our society to be the most important thing, to be the most important thing about us. And so therefore I feel, so it must be true. Well, the problem with that is your feelings are subject to change. On depending on the day, they could change, 100 times. So there is no, in that, in that way of thinking, there is nothing objective about it. It's all subjective. And I believe that all of that comes from the fact that right now We are living in a society that has a relativistic worldview. So relativism says that, there's the relativist fallacy, but relativism essentially says your truth is your truth, my truth is my truth, all truth is good. Even if they are in direct opposition to each other, we still have to accept that they're both true, which goes against one of the three laws of logic, right? Two things in opposition cannot both be true. So having said that, whatever you think is true must be true, we have now changed the definition of truth, and we don't have a definition of truth. So now the word is meaningless. The word doesn't mean anything. And because there is no truth, what are we going to rely on? That's how we ended up with the emotionalism. It's all based on what I think. It's based on what I feel. And emotions make terrible masters because, again, they're constantly subject to change. And I think we have a whole society that has been taught that's the most important thing about them, or one of the most important things about them. And that's like standing on shifting sand, because it's going to change and you don't have anything to go back to. You can't apply laws to emotion. You can't apply, there's no, like if you do a logical syllogism, you can't put emotions, this plus this equals this. It's never going to happen because it's always shifting and changing. And so we have a whole society that does not understand and does not agree that there can be truth and that truth is worth seeking, regardless of how it makes me feel. So anyways, that's one of the things that I think. I'd be curious, what are some of the things that you think of why we're seeing this?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think that just adding some nuance to it is, I think it comes down to the type of people that get into education. I think we're a soft-hearted lot. I mean, if you're going to dedicate your life to being an educator, you want to, you're pulled to feel for these kids. So it's an overcorrection of, I think, from past generations, which is like, it doesn't matter how you feel, just get the job done. And a lot of people from that generation are like, my feelings weren't addressed. So then it goes over, it's an overcorrection to the other side. And, the focus on like self-esteem, became a big thing. And, all the stuff about offense. But what I tell my students all the time is offense is subjective. It's completely subjective. I taught at a Orthodox Jewish school for a bunch of years. And if you would say like a Holocaust joke, some kids would laugh and some kids would be deeply, deeply hurt by that. And it's not even like a logical like way to make sense of who has what reaction. Because there could be a kid whose grandma was in Auschwitz and he's laughing. And then another kid who, had no direct connection to it. And she's, really upset, and so if we're going to make any kind of policy or law about offense, or we're going to make, even like in a school or in society, then we're actually at, we're not, there's no coherency. It's almost like, it's like too vague. It's like laws have to be very concrete. It has to be, the speed limit is 75. It can't be too fast. Like we have to make policies that are very like specific and very definitional. And I think that a lot of this comes down also to a language issue. I think that there's a lot of the way that we're changing the definitions of what words mean, and we're changing them so fast that not everyone's on board with it. And when not everyone's on board with the change of a specific, like real definition, like even basic definitions, the whole like cliche, what is a woman thing? Like, I'm fine with changing a definition of a word. Language is always changing. But if we're not all on board with that change, and we're not, then what we're going to get is what we see now, which is constant fighting. And we're missing each other because we're arguing with the straw man of the other side instead of trying to understand why people would have a stance that's different than ours. And then we vilify people that think differently because they don't see the world the way I see it. So if they see something differently, then they must be wrong or they must be evil. Or, I think in a lot of political issues is like, if you see things differently than me, then there's two reasons. One is you're ignorant. Two is you're immoral. And I think that's overly simplistic. That can't be it. A lot of these big, hot button issues are a 50-50 split. So there's no way that half the country, we're talking about like 100 million people, are going to be just bad people or just ignorant. And yet we just keep hammering down that lane. And that's the way we see the other people on the other side. And I think both sides do that. But I do think that it comes down to answer your question, I think it does come down to the soft-heartedness for lack of a better term, for educators. And if a kid is feeling sad or feeling offended or feeling hurt in some sort of way, then we lean into that. And I love what you said about emotions make terrible masters. I tell my kids that all the time. You know, they make a great slave and a terrible master, and it will take over your rational thinking brain. You're going to act in ways that you know are wrong, but you do it because you're catering to your emotions. I think it's a real problem, and it's just constantly reinforced in the school system.
Yes. Well, and we're physiologically wired that way. Like the way our brain works is the more emotional we are, the dumber we get. Like you physiologically cannot think well, the more emotional you get. And so if people stay or are kept in this constant emotional state, then their ability to think just goes down, down, down. You know, and to your point, so all of these things about the messages, right? The 50-50, there's a reason for all of it, you know, and I always say, man, if I tend to think, if I was hearing and seeing all the same things that somebody on the quote unquote other side, like if we're just going to use politics because it's easy to talk about sides there. If I was seeing and hearing all the things that they're seeing and hearing, I might think a lot more along the same lines as they are. And I say this because people do not realize the effect that the news media, the social media algorithms, who you're listening to, who you're seeing, the effect that they have on our biases, right? You talked about it. Like we have these cognitive biases, we have a confirmation bias, a belief bias, that we tend to see more of what we already think to be true and more of what we already believe. And social media, absolutely 100%. Like if you've ever seen the documentary, The Social Dilemma, they tell you specifically, this is what we're doing. And we do it because it will keep you on our platform. And so you will only just see more of what you already think and more of what you already believe. And so that makes you think everybody thinks this and everybody believes this. And so when election results come out, half the people are completely shocked because they can't believe that there's this many people. And the other side is completely shocked that they're so and it's because so few people are willing to do the work to say, let me just see why they think that. Let me ask the question. Let me see where they're coming from. And, you know, I've got kids that I lead through debate. And the first thing you have to do when you do a debate is you have to study both sides of the issue. You have to know the affirmative and the negative so well that you could argue either one as you believed both of them. And nobody in today's society takes the time to do that. They have no idea. They make a straw man. They poke at the straw man. I say we live in this gotcha society. Like if I can post a meme that's like a gotcha on the other side, oh, I'm winning. And it's like, come on, we got to be better than this. You should be able until you can really, or at least you try to be able to articulate the other side argument as well as they could articulate it, you almost can't even be in the conversation, or at least you can't be in the conversation well, because you don't even know what you're arguing for or against. And it's kind of crazy that this is where we're at.
Yeah, it's almost like in the movie 8 Mile at the end, where spoiler alert, where Eminem is in a rap battle and he just basically makes fun of himself. He roasts himself, he battles himself, and then he hands the mic and the guy's nothing to say. You know, I taught an award-winning debate team. I coached an award-winning debate team for almost 10 years, and I would always have my students argue both sides and I was like, you should be better than the opposing side at their argument, and then say, despite all of that, here's why I disagree. It's so much more powerful. But I wonder, I'm curious what you think about this. I think that Mark Twain quote, and I'm going to paraphrase it. It's like, it's easier to fool someone than to convince them they've been fooled. I think it was a Mark Twain quote.
Yeah.
You know, I'm shocked at how many people like viciously guard their bad ideas. You know, it must be ego or something. I don't know exactly what it is, but I'm not built that way. Like if someone says you're wrong about this big belief you have, right away my eyes perk up and I go, oh, please tell me why I'm wrong. I don't want to walk around with bad ideas. I just think that's so crazy that if someone says like, I can prove that this belief that you have is false, I want to exchange the belief I have with this new belief because I want to come out with the best ideas that there are. And a lot of people aren't built like that. And it just doesn't make sense. I had to restructure my ego And I didn't have to do it much because I never had a ton of ego over, I have the right answers. I'm the sage on the stage. You should listen to me. I know everything. I've never really been like that, but I really leaned into this part of connecting my ego with getting to the right answers rather than having the right answers. Maybe it was like because I read Carol Dweck's mindset about a growth mindset. Maybe that had a big impact on me. But if you shift your ego towards, I want to get to the best answers, regardless of where it is, I think you're going to be in a much better place. And what you want to do is you want to attach your core values to the best policy. So what is your core value? And then the policy themselves can change because your core values stay the same. So that could be like a religious value. It could be just any other, a more secular, moral stance that you have. But if it's like you support, let's just say like affirmative action. Okay. You support affirmative action. Why? Well, because you believe in giving some sort of helping hand to people who've been systemically marginalized in the past. All right, great. So you want to help out people who are at a disadvantage. Awesome. Well, here's some information how affirmative action actually does the opposite. You should get excited about that because you're actually not loyal to affirmative action as a policy. You're loyal to the principle that you believed was connected to that policy. And I think that that's a good way if people can shift a little bit to just focus on what are your core values, and then whatever policy seems to help support that the most, then that's the one you lean into. But why do you think that people don't do that? It seems like the right approach. It's the approach that I've taken, and it's served me well, but they're not. And is it ego? What do you think it is?
That's interesting. I think some of it could be ego. I think because people don't understand their identity, and they've attached, there's a couple of things. They've attached their identity to the wrong things, right? Like you said, they've attached their identity to being right. They've attached their identity to being in a group, and the group I'm in thinks this way. So therefore it's dangerous to not think like this group. I think that could be one. I think it plays into our cognitive biases. Like, we are fighting part of how our brain works because our brain likes to work fast. Our brain likes to work efficient. And that's why we have these cognitive biases. And so it feels right. It feels right to our brain to protect what we think to be our rightness. And, the way that I always like to talk about what you just said is people are afraid to push against an idea because they're afraid of where it might take them. But So for instance, let me use a good example. Somebody said to me one time, it's not a real conversation or argument unless you're willing to be convinced. And when he said it, it challenged me. And I thought, okay, well, there's some things I'm not willing to be convinced about, right? There's some things about my faith. I'm a Christian. There's some things I'm not willing to be convinced about. But then I thought, well, why not?
Yeah.
Why not, Kathy? So here's the way that I look at it is you've got a belief and somebody has a belief that's different or opposite or whatever, in opposition. And the whole goal is if you can press in toward that belief, most people just stay here and they just push for their belief. They're fighting for their side, whatever side it is. But the goal, if you now make the goal to buckle, to push in, yes, but to buckle toward truth, now that changes everything. See, and again, we live in this society where we don't value truth. And now we've said there is no truth. Truth is changing. So nobody has anything to buckle toward. We're just buckling toward who can yell the loudest, toward who has the best memes, toward right, whoever is the most popular on social media. But if we can say, okay, no, there is a truth here. And if we can say, let's press in and let's buckle toward truth. If what I believe is true, I'll be right back where I started. I don't have to be afraid of this conversation anymore. But if I value truth and we press in and where I buckle is someplace different than where I started, now I need to value truth and say, okay, maybe I can relook this a little bit because the goal is truth. The goal is not protecting my thought or protecting what I thought. So if we can teach people, look, your brain is going to naturally want to do this, but here's a higher value. And the higher value is truth. Like, how can we love truth? How can we desire truth? If we have that, then that makes us very open. Not saying that, okay, we all have to give up what we think and what we believe. No, just do some work. Just be willing to do a little bit of work, trusting that if what you believe is true, you'll wind up right back there again. And that's a great thing. And if it's not, well, maybe you can adjust some things as you go. So anyways, that's kind of how I've looked at it.
Yeah, it's funny you bring up identity, because that's been a huge thing that I've learned on this podcast. Because I started a while ago. I started in January 2019, and I've just brought on people from very different walks of life. I've had 9 different transgender people on the podcast, very different politically and all that stuff. Blue-haired activists and MAGA hat wearers. So what I found is identity really matters. I mean, because your brain doesn't know if someone attacks something that's your identity, your brain sees that as attacking you. So if you're a vegan because you just like simplistic minimalist diets and it's just like it's easy, it's just like I just have these like standards and I just gonna stay away from animal products, and someone presents information about how animals die in the processing of grain, or because of, monocrop agriculture is bad for the environment, or how there's a lot of health issues around people not getting enough protein or something along those omega-3s, whatever it is. And you're not like loyal to the like vegan movement, then you just go, oh, okay, that's good information for me to have, and maybe I'll adjust. But if you are vegan girl 35 on X or on Instagram, then it's like you're attacking me, and your brain doesn't actually know the difference. And so that really, I think it can't be ignored. Also, the element of belonging. If all of your friends are vegan, and you abandon that, now you're going to lose that sense of belonging, which again, our brains are wired to belong. They're not wired to critically think, because if your tribe is we're still riding these same genetics from thousands of years. So if your tribe is saying, up is the way to go, and you go, wait a second, are you sure it's up? Maybe it's down. Then you could get ostracized. You get booted out of the tribe. And historically, we are saying that if we're not a part of a tribe, we're at a greater risk of dying and not surviving. So to survive, stay in your group, protect your identity. And that's a big thing. You mentioned about Christianity. The reason I came to faith late in life, I got baptized when I was 40 on my 40th birthday. And I realized that if I'm going to go down this critical thinking pathway that I was on for a long time, I needed some sort of anchor to say, this is true. The way, the truth, the life, this is the anchor that I have. But I found it through debate. Like, I've had conversations with people that said, like, some things are not open for debate. Will, you can't talk about people's, humanity or, some, racism or whatever it is. It's like, well, hold on. I mean, I believe that God and God's truth is up for debate, because that's how I came to that. So if God is open for debate, and I love debates, apologetics and things like that, then everything lower than God, which is everything, should be open for debate. I mean, I think that, I don't want my kids to be followers of Jesus just because I told them so. I want them to wrestle with it. I want them to believe it's truth. That's what faith is all about. Faith is like, I will stake my life on this because I know it to be true. And it gives you a lot of confidence. But if someone says, I can prove to you that, Jesus didn't, raise from the dead or something like that, it's like, show me the proof. Because I'm very confident that doesn't exist, but I'm also willing to hear it. And I think that that when you say like I'm not willing to change my mind on things, is that because you're not willing, or is it because you just have a lot of confidence in it?
Right. Well, and this is why I have so enjoyed watching as you talk about different things, right, politically, and different things that you see in the socials, is you're very well able to do it, to look at both sides. And because I had the same question, right? Because a lot of people, man, there's been a couple times I've done reels on Instagram, and if you hashtag critical thinking, the atheists, the angry atheists come out of the woodwork. Mm-hmm. And if there's anything about faith in there, like it is attack mode. And I'm sure you've probably gotten this as well. And because they're like, you can't apply logic to faith, and you can't apply faith to logic. And I said, I disagree with you. I think that's totally wrong. And so I actually sought out some theologians and asked them this question: is there a disparity between logic and faith? And one of the conversations that I had, it was super interesting. I'm trying to think. He's a theology professor at a college out in the West, starts with a G, and the name is escaping, Gutenberg College. And he said, part of the problem is that Christians ourselves have done ourselves a disservice in the area because we don't understand faith. Our faith has to be on something real. But if we treat faith like this, like I hope, I wish, if we treat faith like it's an emotion, that absolutely makes us look like we're wishing on unicorns. And it doesn't, we don't even think that we have our faith in something solid. We think we have to, summon up enough emotion and that equals faith. He's like, no, really, there is no faith without something logical, you can't separate the two. And I thought that is fantastic. And he's right. We've kind of done a disservice to ourselves because, like you said, ultimately it has to be based on something solid, based on something sure. And I thought, okay, that's really interesting. And, and getting into I love following the apologetics. These people are so smart and the way that they apply things is super interesting to me. So I love it that your critical thinking brought you there. Like, what was that path? How did critical thinking bring you to Christianity?
Yeah. I mean, I love talking about it. It was a lot. It was like piecing a puzzle together, inch by inch by inch. It wasn't from pastors, really. It was from people like Stephen C. Meyer and John Lennox and William Lane Craig and people like that. What happened was I was reading a lot of atheist books. So I love challenging different ideas. I was raised Christian-ish, but it was always like, it was more of like an emotional thing, like you said. And I was like, all right, well, I'm going to try and debunk this. It's kind of a similar path to like C.S. Lewis. And so I started watching a lot of debates and reading books. I read, The God Delusion, with Dawkins. I read, Sam Harris. I watched a lot of debates though, and read their work. And it just was like, this is lacking something. And I was kind of running from it. And then as soon as I turned around and started going toward it, then it started to pour out. And it's just backwards because you have to kind of take the leap. And then once you take a leap, you start to see it a little bit more. But that whole process was really, really interesting for me. I had some really staunch atheists on my podcast, and what they revealed was, like, part of the new atheist movement is that a lot of this woke stuff, for lack of it's a pejorative term, but for lack of a better term, because we all kind of know what that means, it started in the new atheist movement. And I realized, listening to atheist scientists like Peter Boghossian or Jonathan Haidt, say it seems like we have a container for belief in a higher power. And when you abandon traditional religion for that, something's going to fill in that gap. And so if you get rid of ancient texts, then you still have to make sense of right or wrong. Like, if we are conscious beings, if you believe in free will, which is a whole different, topic. But if you believe in free will, then you have the decision to make. I want to make the right decision. Well, how do you know what the right decision is? And once I realized that, as a teacher, if I'll say, like, you're going to do a book report. Here's a project. Okay. This is last year's project and it's the best. This is an A++. This is the absolute best. You're not going to reach this, but it's something to aim for. It's something to aspire to. That was Jesus. And that is what Jesus's role is like a model for how to be. And if you get off the pathway, you don't live as Jesus did because it's an impossible standard to meet. At least you have an aim, and I love the concept. Once I realized the concept of sin is that Hebrew word hafta, it's to miss the mark, miss the bullseye, then you're missing what is the ideal. And anytime you're missing the ideal, you're sinning, essentially. So if people don't have those moral guides about how to live, then they just go to something very simple. So what do you know is wrong? Well, racism is wrong. Sure. So anti-racism must be right, and they just have these overly simplistic ideologies that are going to get them somewhere, but it's not going to be as fleshed out as these religions that have been around for a long time, steering people in the right direction. So it was a long process. But then once I got there, I realized that it's not illogical at all. When who runs the NIH? Francis Collins. Francis Collins went into doing the Human Genome Project as an atheist, and then once he learned more about human genetics than anyone else on the planet, he came out an evangelical Christian. I heard the way they described it one time. I think it was him who said, like, if you come downstairs in the morning, excuse me, and alphabet cereal is just like spilled out on the counter. Good morning, Kathy. I hope you have a great day. There's some coffee in the pot. I'll see you tonight and we'll watch a movie. Well, that just spilled that way is a lot more illogical than it was designed.
Right.
like even basics that we know, like basic stuff, like C.S. Lewis talked about, a building has an architect, that designs have a designer, that seems to be a code in our genetics. There's a code, mathematics, mathematics, like that seems to be logically designed. So the idea that it just happened to be just doesn't make logical sense to me. So that's this kind of stuff that got me on the board with like, all right, so there is a creator. Okay. I do believe in free will. So then I just kept pulling at that string, being a searcher. And then I arrived where I'm at now, which is just, dedicating my life to Jesus and going all in on that.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Thanks for sharing that story.
Yeah.
It's crazy because you're right. We fill that void with something. And it seems to me, I don't know if this is what you've observed or, in the people that you've talked to, but it seems to me like a lot of, not a lot of, some of these atheists, at least the ones that are coming out of the woodwork sometimes on Instagram, they have put critical thinking in their mind as their God. Like they've replaced that. And so it's really interesting in the critical thinking space. There's two ends. It seems like some people like you and I, we're seeking toward truth because we believe there is truth and that we can know it. And it's part of the, how God created man to know truth. But then there's others who it just seems like critical thinking is the end in itself. Like that's the goal and that's the God. And it just seems a little bit sad because I feel like, oh man, you're so close, but there's one step more, right? There's one step more that we can seek toward truth, not just this process. Like critical thinking is a process, but it's a process to take us to a goal, to an endpoint. And I feel like they're missing it. And it's kind of sad.
Yeah, maybe they because I've talked to some of them and I've relationship with them. Some personalities are just different. They don't need that anchor. They're okay with just saying like, I'm in the process of finding truth forever and I'm not going to land on it. And that just didn't work for me. I was like, I want to land on something. Yeah. I need some sort of like roots. I need something. Everything else is up for debate. And this is up for debate, but everything else is like, I could change my mind on this, and that, and everything. I need to have something solid. And maybe it's my personality. I don't know. Cause some of the atheists that I've talked to, they're okay with just, I don't know anything. It's a very Socrates type thing. Like, that just wasn't working for me. That's the scientific method is constantly, searching. It's ongoing forever. Yeah. So maybe it's a personality element of mine too, that I wasn't able to just say, I'll never find the truth.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, that makes total sense to me. So I've got a question for you. So for you, you're coming out of a classroom environment, right? Where you were obviously were different than what happens in a normal classroom environment. And you thought about things differently. You did things differently with the kids that you were teaching, the students that you had. So two-part question. So number one, what do you think made you different and able to do that differently with them? And then number two, if you could give just one tip to parents to start to help their kids learn to think critically, what would you say?
Yeah. So what made me different is my area of expertise wasn't in a specific subject matter. It was the process I was using social studies, mostly like history and government, economic, civics, as just a vehicle to make sense of the world. So a lot of teachers are dedicated to their subject matter. At least in the schools that I've been at, they're a math person and they just love math, or they're a history buff and they dress up like Confederate soldier on the weekends. I was never like that. It was always just giving young people an ability to think their way through it so that they can come out ahead, ready and prepared for life. So it was always about direct application. I got asked for years, what got me into teaching. Not because parents wanted their kids to become teachers, but they wanted their kids to find something that they were great at and they were passionate about, and they could see that was like oozing out of me. So it took me a while to figure it out. And what I realized was in school, I was looking, here's what it is, Kathy, we recognize that it's cool to be smart. It's cool to be capable. We all admire people who are smart and capable, but the institution that's designed to get you to be smart and capable sucks. And I was like, there's such a disconnect there. I don't understand why the thing that's designed to get us to this point is so terrible and not getting us to this point. I was like, I could do it better than them. And that's really what it was. It was like just getting to like, how do you become smart and capable? And that's why the name of my online platform is Paradox, is because it's not about it's not about the details. It's about recognizing big patterns, and it's about direct application. Like some history teachers might teach the War of 1812, and they'll talk about how the White House was burned down. They'll talk about Andrew Jackson as a great war hero. It's like, no, it's about conflict and conflict resolution. You're not going to remember the names of all the generals. No one is going to remember that. That's not what matters. Kids just memorize that, throw it down on the test, get an A, and then they move on. But you will remember how to avoid conflict and how to resolve conflict so we don't continue, Revolutionary War Part 2, which the War of 1812 is. So I think the direct application, I didn't like school, but I wanted to be smart. So I've filled in that role for what I have really loved to have had when I was of that age. I think that's a big part of what made me different. But I also was very, very dedicated to my students. I had lunch with a different student every day. I was much more of like a mentor than I ever was like a history teacher. And I still have great relationships with students who have been graduating. I've taught for 17 years. So kids in their mid 30s with 3 kids and stuff. I still talk to them regularly, and they talk about the impact that I had because I was always connecting things to them specifically. Awesome. The second question you had was about where to start with critical thinking. I think it has to be modeled. I think that there's a lot of different ways that you can, do as I say, not as I do. I don't think that works, but I think that if you show your kids how you can change your position on things, if you expose your kids to different viewpoints, I think you have to set the culture, whether it's at school or within the house, of this is what we do here. We are open-minded to all different perspectives. We're challenging our own viewpoints, and, sitting around the dinner table, like, I used to think about this and now I got this. Just like a couple of weeks ago, I was so convinced that payday loans in like bad neighborhoods were bad. These payday loan places. I was like, they're predatory loan places. And I talked to someone who was raised in the hood, and they talked about how those loan places, even with their high rates and stuff, kept them from being homeless several times throughout their childhood because banks wouldn't give them loans and they were desperate for money right now. And that added some nuance to this. And I go, oh, so it's not so clear cut as this is evil, or there's bad things about it. Sure. But it's more complex than I ever thought it was. And then I share that story with my class or with my kids. So you're always challenging what you know to be true. I think that you start with the norm there. I think modeling it, and so the parents got to get over their own egos. Like we said earlier, like they have to be willing to go on that journey to challenge whatever it is that they believe to be true. I think that's a good place to start. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I love that. And you're so right. We call it being the lead learner. Like, are you as the parent, the lead learner in your family, for your child? And, one of the things I always ask is, what is something you've changed your mind on recently? What is something you've learned that's new? What is something that's challenged what you thought? Like this is going to sound like a crazy example, but for me, for the last couple of years, I've been seeing this stuff about flat Earth, right? Flat Earth that's out there. And most of it was mocking people who believe in flat Earth. And I'll never forget, there was one day that some meme came across my news feed, and it showed like the sun as a round ball, and Mercury is a round ball, Venus is a round ball, Earth is a flat disc, Mars is a round ball, on. And it looked so silly. And I was like, that is the dumbest thing. I can't believe people believe this. And then I had the thought, I wonder if that's what they really believe. And then that got me like, let me see if that's actually what they believe. And guess what? That's not what they believe. Right. What they believe is something totally different. And now I'm fascinated. I'm like, oh, wow, I just learned something new. I got proven wrong about what I thought they thought. They don't even think that. Let me see what they think. And the thing I realized is when we understand where people are coming from and why they believe what they believe, sometimes what they believe makes a whole lot more sense than what we assumed what they actually believed. And so it was just such a good lesson to me, like, hey, you can't assume to know that you think because you saw something on social media that this is a good representative of what they believe. It's not. It was a caricature, right? It was a straw man of what they actually believed. And it was just super interesting.
I love that. I'm the same way. I've been trying to get, flat earthers, all these different people on the podcast, and go in with like real sincere, like, give me the best, because I want to be able to argue it well. I watched an interview, this is a couple of years ago, of Alex Jones. He did a long form interview. I think it was on Joe Rogan. And I just posted something about it. And a couple of teachers at my school were like, I can't believe that you're platforming Alex Jones. I was like, if you think Alex Jones is dangerous, here's what you do. Okay. You assign to your class, go through all of the stuff Alex Jones said, and then go on a deep dive to try and prove him wrong. Okay. And like, not only that, but you prove him wrong in the way that you and I were talking about, which is like, what did he say that was correct? And what did he say that wasn't? Because I did the same thing, the unread library effect, where I was just like, I don't watch Alex Jones. He's crazy. He said the terrible things about Sandy Hook. So he's just off. He's crazy. And then when you dive in a little bit, you're like, oh, he called this out. He called that out. He's talked about Epstein Island, years and years ago, and it sounded crazy. He talked about, all this stuff about like the frogs turning gay or whatever, but like how certain plastics and things can actually lower testosterone. And like, there is some level of truth to this stuff. And that just is exciting for me. I love the nuance. I love that. I love being able to see like complicated elements of everything. That just fires me up. And I think that my students see that. So when they have a question that they're like, oh, this is a dumb question, it's like, no. There's nothing off limits to be curious about. Yeah. And I think that when you hold these hard lines, then it stifles the curiosity. I always say schools exchange, it's a compliance model that exchanges curiosity for compliance. Yep. And I think it's so sad when you're not curious. Like, people aren't curious about why so many people would be flat earthers or think we didn't land on the moon or think whatever it is, and I think it's such a shame, because you don't want to, purge that curiosity, that natural curiosity that so many kids have. Kids might say like, well, why isn't Earth flat? It seems like it's flat. I get a level out and I stick it on the ground. It might be flat, and just like, no, it's not. Like, instead of like, well, let's discover, let's figure it out. Let's go where the evidence lies. And it's just a way better approach. And we just don't do that enough. We're just so quick to dismiss people that go against what the status quo is about what's appropriate to think about. What's the window? I forget what it is. The Overton window of what's like acceptable beliefs. Yes. We're so scared to get out of that. And I think that once you venture out of that and you realize like, oh, this is actually really fun and interesting, then you can just come and go all the time. But you have to go through that process of giving up what you believe to be true first.
Yeah. And 100%, and to answer your question, one of the things that I love teaching, because you're right in what you said that parents can do, like, they need to hear you talking out loud. They need to hear you as a parent thinking out loud about the things that you're seeing and that you're hearing. One of the things that I love to do, and this is why I feel like it's so interesting, why what you do and what I do are like, what's the word, where they go in order. Because if you can give kids the grammar, right? So in the classical model, they believe that kids learn grammar, dialectic, rhetoric. So grammar means you have to learn the language of a topic so that you can engage in the topic, right? So you can't fix a car until you know what a carburetor, an engine, and a wrench are, right? So grammar, and then the dialectic is when you start to use it, and the rhetorical is when you're actually good and you're teaching it, and you can now therefore apply it. And so one of the things that I love to tell parents is, look, just give your kids the grammar, teach them some skills of critical thinking, teach them what the logical fallacies are, teach them what the cognitive biases are, because now they have language for it. Now, because when your brain is always trying to make sense of things. And so when you can name things for your brain loves names, it loves organization. So now if they can have the name for something, oh, that's a red herring, or, oh, that's an appeal to fear. Now, as soon as they see it, they got it and they know what it is. And so, and that's where I've been. I've been very much in the grammar phase. Okay, let's teach your kids the grammar of good thinking, and here's what it is, and here's how to do it. And then the next step is what you do. And now it's applying it. So now we're going to apply it. We're going to take this thing from culture. We're going to take this thing from, society or whatever, and we're going to apply that thinking, and we're going to ask the questions, and we're going to start working with it, and we're going to wrestle with this thing. And that is the road that people go on with critical thinking. Is you've got to learn a little bit about it, so you have something to work with, and then you got to work with it. And then hopefully, right, yours and my goals are that we will produce people who can go into society and do good with that, and take it and make a difference and live good lives, but be able to have a I don't know if this is the right word to use. This might be a little too much, but a sane conversation about things and really work to come toward, no, let's do something that's true and something that's good. And, and really make a difference. So I know we're very much on the same path in terms of that.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because this is stuff that goes back to like ancient Greek philosophy all the way up through the great writers. This is stuff that we've established already, and yet we're still here. We're here more than ever. Like we have the abundance of information. We have so much information on our phones. And yet because of the algorithms, because of the availability of confirmation bias, it's actually not an abundance of information. Like you can be more of a critical thinker now than ever, but we still devolve into our emotions and these logical fallacies and different cognitive biases and things like that it's like a waste of these resources. We have every library on the planet and every expert on the planet. We can do more critical thinking now than ever. And it seems like we're more blinded and closed-minded than ever. And it's such a shame.
It's a shame. Yes, I agree. I agree. I agree. Yep.
So just kind of like wrapping this up, like where do we go from here? Like how do we expand this, scale this kind of stuff out? Is it through podcasting and using social media? Is it, because you have to almost to follow your account, to follow your stuff, you almost have to be like the little kid in the Emperor's New Clothes. You have to kind of be like willing to go, all right, I'm this type of person. And it's not like I know how to get a lot of views on like an Instagram Reels. You just hammer that thing that people will fire people up, and you can just keep hitting that button over and over again, get a lot of views. But when I say, oh, this isn't so complicated, this is really nuanced, about Kamala Harris or something, then all my Trump supporting, followers are just like, no, she's terrible. And, if you say something that's like anti-Trump or anti, whatever, or pro-Trump, then people just get so fired up when they don't know how to box you in. They don't know what category to put you in. And I think that I don't know really how to scale this other than what we're doing. What do you think?
Oh, dude, if I knew, I would already be doing it. You're so right. And I just feel like, I just saw something today. I just, even if it's the quiet faithfulness, and not that I'm trying to be quiet, but just the faithfulness of, I'm going to share this message, and I don't know how else to get it out there other than to say, God, please do something with this, right? This is me being faithful to what I believe you've called me to do. And you're going to have to take it somewhere, wherever it's going to go. I don't know any way other than that. But I feel like if we can at least keep talking about it, if other people can hear and they can keep talking about it, hopefully, for the love of God, it catches on and it takes root. And I feel like this is why I love, this is why I love talking to the middle schoolers and the high schoolers, because when they get it, they have it. It's the whole thing that, it's just like anything that you memorize, it's never taken away. Anything that you learn, nobody can take it away from you. And so once a kid has this skill and they know how to think for themselves, I feel that's protection. That is an inoculation against a lot, against, manipulation, against propaganda, against all these things that we're seeing in society. At least that's my hope. And that is what I'm seeing in these kids that I've had that have done this. They're like, oh yeah, they see it everywhere. And to me, that's my hope, is that we can potentially raise a generation of kids who, at least some of them, have some really good skills, that they're able to think about things, and that they'll have the courage to be the one saying, yeah, no, that's not true. Right. Even though they're going to be mocked and misunderstood. If we can teach them, that's okay. If we can teach them courage right alongside critical thinking, because I think if you're a critical thinker, you have to have courage in today's society, because people are going to think you're crazy.
Yeah. And it's so much easier when they're young. The same way a kid can learn, because of neuroplasticity, they can learn a language so much better than someone who's older. They can pick up on this stuff too. So you almost have to get them when they're younger. It's a lot less of a fight. So getting this stuff into schools, whether it's through PD, but then you got to, and I've done things with my staff before. I'm an old school, and they're just so closed off to it. just like things that get them to challenge their beliefs and just wrestle with it. And they just won't. So kids are still going to be at the mercy of their teachers, who are deeply entrenched a lot of times in a specific political ideology or certain beliefs. And that's just like the nature of the game, unfortunately. But
yeah,
you're right. Kids are where it's at, young people to become, immune. I've run a master class called Brainwash Proof Your Kids. And it's just this kind of stuff. Cause I think parents recognize the importance of it, but if you don't, then they're going to be at the whims of whoever is out there. Cause it's a big game. I teach Edward Bernays and things, what he did with propaganda and relabeling it, public relations and the stuff, the way that he's able, that he was able to get people to buy into things. And there's so many experts, neuroscientists, you're a top neuroscientist, you know how to manipulate minds. You go work for one of these big tech companies and they're going to bring you in, they're going to pay you a good salary to, how do we manipulate these brains to stay on these apps for a very long time? And we can see what that's doing to our youth, and it's really not good. So, I think it's up to the parents. I think that you have to raise your own kids. You get one shot at raising your kids. And if you outsource that to the schools, then they're going to raise your kid the way that they see fit. And that might not be the way that you see fit. So, just a 100%. Couple of exercises at home, changing the norms at home can make them way more resistant to that kind of stuff. And they're going to get in trouble. Maybe they'll raise their hand, but you know what? Like, the people that we remember throughout history are the troublemakers. They're the ones who don't follow the rules. I always thought that was interesting as a history teacher. It's like, come in, sit down, do everything I tell you to do. Now let's learn about these American heroes that have posters on the wall, like Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, Jesus, Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, Socrates, all these people that were like, no, I'm not going to follow this. I'm not going to just follow the rules blindly. But so there's that disconnect there all the time.
Well, and that's why we got to right alongside critical thinking. We got to teach them courage, because it's going to take courage to do that. They're going to have to do it. So, yeah. So Will, I would love, for my audience, can you tell us where people can find you? How can they learn more about what you do?
Absolutely. So my Instagram is the social media platform I use most. That's where I started, and it's too much to keep track of all the other ones. So it's just my name, Will Rusch, WILLREUSCH. And my critical thinking platform that I have, that I just launched a couple of months ago, I have students enrolled from all over the country. I do one-on-ones with younger kids and stuff like that. It's called Patterdox, PATTERDOX. And I came up with the name because it's about pattern recognition. So even like the logo has a whole bunch of things in it. It has the cross references of the Bible, even though it's a secular program, cross references of the Bible. I love that image. It has the Fibonacci sequence, the yin yang. It's just this idea of understanding the world through patterns and direct application of everything. It's not about the specifics of history or government. It's really about the application of how learning about this is going to serve you best in your throughout your life. And it's really exciting. It's new for me, but it's been really rewarding, and it's been really cool to dive into the homeschool world too and serve those communities. Because if you're in that world, then you probably recognize that there's something missing from a traditional education. And I seem to be filling in that gap really well. But what about you? Where does everyone get your stuff?
Yeah. So Filter It Through a Brain Cell is my podcast. And I just do short, fun little episodes. That my whole goal is I want parents of middle schoolers, and I even have some younger than middle schoolers who listen, that they can hit play on a 7-8 minute episode on their way to soccer practice, on their way to school, and they can listen along with their kids. 2 generations at the same time are learning, and then they can have a great conversation about it. So it's super, super simple, super fun. It is definitely the step before what you do. It's the grammar phase of learning. And I have a membership called Crazy Thinkers, where every month it's just a way to help parents review. Because it's one thing to hear an episode about a fallacy. It's another one to remember it and to be able to recognize it. So I use memes, articles, and headlines. I curate a list of, hey, here's some memes. And I give the parents the questions, and then I give them the answer, so they don't have to wonder, did I get it right or did I get it wrong? Yeah. So they can practice with real world stuff. Because the bottom line is these kids are going to go out there and they're going to have a social media feed one day themselves. And they're going to see stuff, and they're going to see memes, and they're going to see crazy things that's being told them like it's true. And I want them to be able, their first thought, well, is that really true? Well, why? What are they saying? What's their worldview? Right? I want them to be able to automatically go through this list of questions and figure it out. So I just make it super simple for parents to be able to do that and to practice. So so Instagram, Filter It Through a Brain Cell. That's primarily where I'm at as well.
I love it. Oh man, we're so aligned, so let's get more people on board with this and
Yes.
have it grow exponentially. Kathy,
Yeah.
I really love this conversation. I love what you're doing. It's really awesome. Like it's very easy to digest,
Yeah.
which is important, as you
Yeah.
say, because some
Yeah.
of this stuff can get really complicated. And even if you don't memorize what it is, you'll still be able to pick it out.
Yep.
I still don't remember the names of all of them, but I know what that is. And I can kind of I can give the definition, but maybe not like the word, the label,
Exactly.
the name.
Oh, me too. I've done an episode on 250 different logical fallacies. I don't remember all of them, but
Right.
I know how to think about it and I can figure out what's wrong with the argument. And that's the whole goal. That's the whole goal.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So no, thanks, Will. I sure appreciate it. It's been great getting to chat with you.
Me too. Yeah, this is really awesome. Thanks for listening, guys. Cool.